Welcome to the Anti-Racism Leadership Institute podcast, where we ignite the sparks of change and inspire a world free of racism. This podcast is dedicated to highlighting the most cutting-edge anti-racist research in education for the purpose of connecting practitioners to powerful research-based approaches to racial equity. I am your host, Dr. Tracey A. Benson, and today we invite you on a transformative journey as we delve into the efforts and triumphs of those dedicated to fostering racial equity within education. Welcome to the Anti-Racism Leadership Institute Research and Practice podcast. Today we have the opportunity to talk with Michelle Cody and Dr.Kari Kokka about their co-authored article, Educational Facials, a Healing Tool for the Beautiful Struggle. Michelle Cody is a middle school mathematics and literacy teacher in San Francisco, California. Dr. Kokka is an associate professor of mathematics education in the Department of Teaching and Learning at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Together, they co-host the Critical Math Drop podcast, available on criticalmathdrop.com, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. The link to their podcast is also available in the show notes. Welcome, and thank you both for coming today. I really appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you tell your people to like and subscribe first? Like, like and subscribe. Hit that button after you listen to this. But hit that button. Listen to us.
For both podcasts.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to start out so folks can just know who you are, right? Sort of your history and how you came to this concept of social justice math education and why that became even a concept for you in the first place. Like in my history, I was a fourth grade math and science teacher. And so this epistemology around social justice math education was a new concept that I wasn't really familiar with. I just taught from my curriculum. So how is it that you went from going from the curriculum to expanding to more of a social justice lens? And whoever, would like to start or answer that question can dive into that.
I can start first. So I was a high school math teacher and math teacher activist for 11 years prior to going back to grad school. And I was doing a lot of organizing work in the classroom, but I didn't have as much opportunity to infuse social justice math tasks in my own classroom. And so that was what I wanted to study, right? So I wanted to marry these two things that I was doing. So my principal let me take my students to protests and rallies in the middle of the school day. We organized a town hall meeting with former Black Panthers and Young Lords. So I was doing a lot of community organizing and meeting a lot of amazing organizers in New York City. And I really wanted to infuse that more with my actual practice. And then I had also co-founded a math and social justice conference in 2007, Creating Balance in an Unjust World. And so actually through Michelle's classroom was really what helped me to learn even more about the operationalization of social justice math.
So I been working with young folks for a really long time. I actually started in Sunday school. I used to teach Sunday school. And then I moved from Sunday school to working for this program called Aim High, which I still currently work. I'm no longer a teacher there, but I'm like a site director / principal there. And it was there at Aim High that my site directors were like, girl, you need to go into teaching. And I was like, nope, no. Mm-mm. That's a poor man's job. No, thank you. And they're like, no, this is your calling. This is what you're supposed to do. And I was like, ugh. At that point, I had already just finished getting my undergrad in economics from the Howard University. Woo, 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 woo. Howard people are so annoying. Yes, we are. And so I applied to the social justice, urban education and social justice program at USF. And I got in. Well, fun fact, I didn't get in the first time. I got rejected, and there was tears and Cheddar Bay biscuits at Red Lobsters with two of my friends as I didn't get in to the program. But that was okay because that wasn't the cohort I was supposed to be with. The following year, I did after some stalking of Cam showing up at places and being like, "Pick me, choose me. I should be in your next cohort." I was put into the program, and so it was there that I was able to get some understanding and some framework because I've always been a Black woman. I've always navigated the space as a Black woman. I went to a Black college. I went to a predominantly Asian high school. I went to Lowell High School. And so othering was always a thing that I've always known and experienced, but it was because of being in that class, in that program, I was able to put like educational framework, and I was able to reflect on some of the like conceptualization that I had and some of the like I don't like I don't want to say anti-blackness, but like some like things that I didn't know inherently. Like, oh wait, why do I think that? Oh, it's because of all of these, because of the environment that I was around. And like, I come from two parents who graduated from college, right? And they always promoted like going to college and doing what you got to do. Um, and so that wasn't the thing, but it's just like when you live in San Francisco and you won't go to a school when you don't see a lot of people that look like you, and then you go to a school where you see everybody looks like you, you have to do some reflection. You have to do some like thinking and synthesizing about each of those very unique experiences and how they made you who you are. Anyways, so I had did the elementary ed, so I was an elementary ed teacher, but I all the work I did at Aim High was always science. I was always teaching seventh grade science, and so I got my first gig when I was still in grad school teaching seventh grade math and science. And it was there that my next gig, 2 years later, was teaching just math at a predominantly, gentrification is happening, so it's a little different, but it was originally a predominantly Black school in a Black neighborhood. And so it was Cam who introduced me to Carrie at the NAME conference. And he was like, "Oh, you guys are both math people. You should connect." And so uh, Carrie like was very instrumental in helping me push forward because it was rough. Like when we both decided for her to come into my classroom, um, she sat there for like weeks, and your girl didn't know social justice math, and I just had this woman in my room staring at me 2 times a week, and I was like, bruh, something has to change. And it was God, it was Kimberly Foster, and she did a I don't know, video about how people are hating so hard on Beyonce's daughter.
Mm.
And we use that to talk about online bullying, and we attach that to like the number line and positive and negative like words and creating an absolute value equation. And so got the kids to kind of like watch this video, talk about like anti-blackness and talk about what that looks like, and then look at some mean tweets. I've actually since got rid of that thing because I did not want to be a part of this, like the like taking down of this little girl. So it was like it was a lesson I used for a couple of years. And again, this is when we talk about social justice math. And I think
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for all that. No, I appreciate that very much. And I want to start with the conceptual framing of social justice math. And I'm just going to play the role of your, 20-year math teacher who've mastered the technical skills of teaching math, right? And they're like social justice math, and this is a political climate. Like, what's this woke ideology making its way into math? I'm a master math teacher. Why do I need to be familiar with infusing social justice into my mathematic lessons? It doesn't make any sense to me. So, Carrie, can you make it make sense?
Sure. I think we can tag team on this. I can give a definition, and I think Michelle can help with how you would respond to that. So, social justice math is when we are investigating social injustices using dominant mathematics. And so, whenever I'm talking about the math that we see in school textbooks, what's tested on exams, we normally just refer to that as mathematics, but there are lots of different types of mathematics, right? So I refer to that as the dominant mathematics. So we're using school math, dominant math, in order to investigate social injustices. We could think about police brutality, COVID statistics, which communities were hit the hardest, driving while Black or brown. There's so many different inequities that we need mathematics in order to investigate. And then through my work in Michelle's classroom and another teacher's classroom, I've also theorized. So not only having our dominant math goals and our social justice goals, but also having affective goals for how we want students to feel in the classroom. So do we want to use trauma-informed care practices? Do we want our students to feel more confident about the dominant math? Do we want our students to feel empathy for people? So if the students are privileged and they're doing social justice math, do we want them to feel empathy for others and then be able to take action in solidarity with folks who are organizing? So that's kind of like a basic definition. And then I'll let Michelle answer that other question of, how you would respond to the experienced teacher.
Yeah, so for me, social justice math is just like helping students to use critical thinking skills. I mean, you turn on the news all the time and like they always present you numbers, and these numbers are always used to tell the story that they want to tell. And it's not the numbers that they show you, it's the numbers that they don't show you that you should be looking at. So if you're telling me that like 60% of this is happening and you're saying it this specific way, A, where's the other 40% believing? And why are you asking this specific way? Is this specific way is why you get the 60%? And so to allow students to think critically around the data that's being presented to them is not just beneficial to like communities of colors or traditionally marginalized groups. It's good for everybody. It's good for us to be able to sit there and have critical conversations about what is being presented to us. As far as the 20-year-old vet who's like, I've mastered the math skills, I would say to them, it's like we are behind as a nation when it comes to mathematical mastery and understanding. So, yes, you may have been able to taught these kids um, how to figure out Pythagorean theorem, but what's the use of that if they can't apply it to something effective like creating spaces like gardens inside of like a small community space? So it's about using the practicality of math to apply it to life so that it can anchor. Everyone knows that your brain grows when it takes old information and attaches it to new information. And so we have babies who are learning math every year and it's not sinking to anything. They're just going through the motions to pass this test to get through to the next mathematical world. And so you're not seeing anybody who's actually pushing. And if you want to change who's in the math field, if you want to change what our engineers look like, what our scientists look like, we have to make sure that we make this math make sense. And so we make it make sense. And I'm talking about as young as like kindergarten, first grade. Like, how can we use mathematical practices and understanding of their own? Like, and when we use the word social injustices, it doesn't even have to be as salacious as police brutality because that's a big concept for a kindergartner to kind of understand. It could be as small as like, what kind of grocery stores are in your neighborhood? How far do you have to walk to get to school? How far do you have to walk to get to the hospital or to get to a doctor's office? All of these things impact people's health, right? And so social justice also talks about the health of people. And we're talking about mental health, we're talking about emotional health, we're talking about financial health, we're talking all around spiritual health. And so um, I think that what people hear like social justice math and DEI, they always want to go to this far left concept, and it's just like all of these things are affecting everyone's life. Everyone is impacted by these things. And so if we can have these critical conversations, if we can be chill with each other and we can sit at the table and we can do what we can to make this world better for not just us, but for our children's children's children, then we're doing the work that we need to do.
I appreciate that. And I think what's important, what I took from what both of you all shared, is that it's not a partisan concept, right? Social justice math is applicable to everyone to understand their social context in a very deep way that's just not divorced from these sort of hanging, like you say, Michelle, just trying to learn these concepts to pass a test, right? That we don't have application, but using it to understand our sort of societal context in a way where we can apply that to make our world a better place, regardless of your background, race, gender, religious affiliation, sexual identity, that using it to understand our social context. And so in basic terms, it's applying math concepts in the real world environment for the betterment of society. That's what, I would think in my mind as a response to the educators, like, well, I just want to teach numeracy and how to count and in different theorems.
Yeah, because what you
So
counting, fool? Ask them, like, what are you counting? Like, what are we teaching them? Like, yes, let's teach them numeracy, and what are they counting? Like, let's use that to make it make sense. Everything has come inside of our classroom. Our classrooms are no longer safe spaces, and so you have to arm your students with all the tools that they need to go out there to like protect themselves, to protect their community, to protect their family. And when I use the word protection, I'm not talking about in a violent way. I'm talking about as an educational tool, like sharpen the tools in their brains that they already have so they can do what they need to do to be as successful as they need to be. Sorry, Dr. Benson, I get like a little,
bring the passion. No, we love it. We love it. And transitioning to protection, your article, Educational Facials, was it was very therapeutic for me to read the article, right? Because as a career educator who's been spent time in the classroom, being in middle school AP, being a high school principal, one of very few Black people in the building. The experiences that you outline in sort of trying to survive the racial environment of the school as one of very few is very real, especially when in the field that the work that we do, when folks have their DEI goals, they always say we want to diversify our teaching staff, right? And their goal is just to get more brown people in the building. That is their goal, right? In predominantly white environments, just to get brown people in here without understanding the broader context of what you are asking for of this brown person, that you put in this environment that is not accustomed to having an epistemology or ways of thinking and knowing amongst this brown person who's going to see all the racial microaggressions that happen to the kids, that as well as we as brown educators have to absorb from our colleagues, while we have to teach at the same time. And so, where did this idea of educational facials come from? Like, why? And you explain it in the article, but I think it's fitting to sort of use this as a frame to understand the environment of your typical educator of color in predominantly white environments. But how did you sort of theorize educational facials?
Oh yeah. So it's actually an old concept. I was at a Teachers for Social Justice conference, and I was listening to a practitioner by the name of Tiffany, and I don't even know what she was talking about. But I ended up raising my hand, and I was just like, I feel like being in these spaces is like an educational facial. Being in spaces that help you take off the grime and the layering of all the things that you encounter being inside of the world of education. And so you want to put yourself in spaces to like take, like, if you want to, like, I'm really into my face. It don't look like I'm really into like face cream stuff right now because I got a little stuff going on around in my face, and it's just like, so I'm reading all this stuff, like, how do you keep like your hyperpigmentation up, and what about like exposure to the sun, because the sun is everywhere, right? You're always going to have exposure to the sun. How do you combat exposure to sun? What kind of like, you know, sunscreen and sunblock and moisturizer? Do I use day cream? Do I use night cream? Like, how do I exfoliate the skin? And it's like this whole big like menu of things to do in order to like help me get to where I want to be, or to maintain the skin that I want to maintain. And so that definitely aligns to what you are as a teacher. Like, when you go into the world of education, most of us are like doughy eyed, and we're like, yo, we're just going to get inside the classroom, and we're just going to be up there, and we're going to be like, 1+1=2. And then Johnny's going to raise his hand and be like, because of you, I'm now going to become a doctor because you told me 1+1=2. And you're like, yes, Johnny. And you're like, yes, Miss Cody. And we're like, woo, right? Because that's the thing that's sold to you in grad school. And it's kind of still sold to you in grad school now. And what you don't realize is like there's all these other factors that stop you from being able to articulate appropriately to Johnny that 1+1=2. There's also all these factors that stop Johnny to be able to absorb what you're trying to tell him about 1+1=2. And so the whole concept around these educational facials in its inception was like putting yourself into spaces that will allow you to get the healing that you need as an educator so that you don't do harm, right? It's like the Hippocratic oath for doctors is do no harm. That same thing should be applied to teachers. Carrie?
Yeah. So what we did, so based off of that concept, and it's so funny. I reread our article this morning, and I was like, oh, this is it. Michelle and I did a great job. This is an article. Sometimes when you write things, and you publish them, and you're like, I'm not sure if I like that article that I published. But I was re-inspired also by reading your personal narrative, Michelle. So what we both did was we wrote our personal narratives. We talked about our personal narratives together. So, based on this concept that Michelle first theorized in 2015 at the Teachers for Social Justice Conference, we articulated these different components. So, an educational facial includes analysis of one's climate, situation, and our body, mind, spirit. So, we're trying to reunite our body, mind, and spirit that Western conceptualizations of knowledge try to pull apart. We want to cleanse and extract the toxins from our skin. So, white supremacy, cis heteropatriarchy, ableism, capitalism, imperialism. And then we want to be able to heal and protect our skin or our body, mind, spirit. And so, when we have, Michelle calls it this protective coating, so that we can re enter a harmful space. And we always want to do this in community with others, because I feel like it's so easy to gaslight ourselves, to think like, oh, it's not that bad. Or, oh, even if I switched institutions, I bet you it's going to be just as bad. Right. And so when we're in community, we have others who can prevent us from gaslighting ourselves, to say, yes, what you feel is real. It's not in your head. You're not making it up. You're not overreacting. Um, and so, yeah, so in the article, we share our personal narratives, and then we also give this menu of educational facials, like the introductory facial, going to a justice oriented conference, the do it yourself educational facial. Um, and so, what we really hope, so it's really great to hear, Dr. Benson, that you felt seen and heard through reading that article because of your own experience. I do have a question. I know this is your podcast, and you're
Oh
asking
no,
us questions.
you can ask up.
Okay, I have a question. So I listened to your and it's related to the educational facials. So I listened to your 5 common questions podcast episode, and one of the things that you talked about was when there is a resistant colleague and you want to um, handle a situation with empathy, right? Like, where are they coming from? Why do they feel this way? And I guess I'm curious, with your own experience in higher education, when we experience that resistance, do you feel like the empathy strategy, I don't want to say always works, but I guess you have the same advice in a higher ed setting.
And I appreciate, I mean, reading your story and also reading your story, Michelle, about your upbringing and sort of being seen as a person who's an Oreo. Like I experienced the same thing, right? Now to have empathy for those who are of the same skin color who are calling you an Oreo just because you speak right, you speak a different vernacular and you're in AP classes, right? But the concept of empathy helps us. I mean, I think it goes along with the concept of thinking about an educational facial, right? Because if we learn to empathize, regardless of if we agree with the person or not, we at least need to understand where they might be coming from. Because in most cases, even in academia, and I had a horrific experience as an assistant professor, an absolutely horrific experience when I joined the University of North Carolina at Charlotte in a department that had, it was like 90% white, and I was a new shiny professor who came in. I'm historically a teacher, and I love teaching. And so when they gave me the hardest classes to teach, the law and policy classes, and I rocked it. I loved it. I'm a teacher. I taught it through an anti-racist lens, and that's what we did. And I had students who came back class after class who wanted to continue to take classes with me. And it was a threat to several of my colleagues because they're the new shiny young professor, right? But I'm coming in, I'm the diversity hire according to them. I'm getting a lot of the attention from the university. I'm the Harvard guy, right? Which that just intimidates people who, well, my degree is just as good as yours. Like, I never said your degree wasn't as good as mine, but their level of just feeling their own self esteem is affected just by my presence, right? And even though, in my experience during my third year review, one of one of my colleagues chose to come after me to try to get me to not be reappointed. Empathy helped me really get through it because it was traumatic, and she felt threatened by me. Um, and and in the sort of the hierarchy of higher education, because it's a very strict hierarchy, and old white men control everything. It's basically a fraternity. Everything's peer reviewed, so it's a moving target, right? And so that's the environment where we live in, and we are a threat because we are, folks who do this type of work are countercultural to people's normalcy. And so for me, it didn't make it, it didn't all go away because I was empathetic, but I believe that in order to heal ourselves, we must not demonize who we see as enemies, but yet understand that it comes from, even though we don't agree, a noble place where it might have to deal with their brokenness.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you. I think that empathy is helpful, for sure, to understand those perspectives. Um, in my experience, I've been teaching since 99. So 11 years in the K-12 space. And in my experience, higher ed has just such a different power dynamic. I mean, it's like you can cut the air, right? It's like it's palpable. Um, and the power that some folks have over you is very different, I think, than in a K-12 space. So I guess thanks for answering. I was just curious because I know that you have, transitioned out of that space and you also have previous K-12 experience.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this could be a whole nother
I
podcast,
know.
right?
I
I have
know.
colleagues. My wife's an academic. She's a Black academic who studies race in the Caribbean, and her and her colleagues of Black women, they have this catharsis amongst each other just because the white heteropatriarchy, I think I use that term right, of higher education, and you can fit the number I mean, percentage of what I'm looking in the sort of the letters and sciences area, you can fit it on like the tip of a thimble, right? Because it's like negligible, compared to the number of white people as a whole in higher education, right? And they want to keep that space, and they can because there's really no governance, and once you're tenured, you can pretty much do anything, like as you know,
Mm-hmm.
associate professor Dr.K.
Thank you.
Climate, right? Especially when we're thinking about this social justice infusion into sort of the babies, right? Because you see a lot of like Mothers for Liberty or these folks who come to school board meetings, like we don't want our students indoctrinated. They're already being indoctrinated, right? White supremacy is an indoctrinate that's already there, right? And so we are already indoctrinating not just your kids, but our kids as well. And that level of comfort with that just blind indoctrination is something that is it's fearful for them because they feel it's a curriculum and a way of thinking that they are afraid of. They're a lot of folks who don't have exposure to no approximation to people of color, no understanding of race and racism, no understanding of their privilege, often have high levels of anxiety, low levels of understanding, right? They just don't have the stamina. So I empathize a lot with these folks that they're not doing it from a malicious place. Our most precious assets are our kids, and these mothers are showing up, even though they might say a lot of like really crazy things. It comes from a place of absolute fear, and it also comes from a place of care,
Yeah,
right? Even
because
though we might
everything's
disagree.
unknown. Like that's the thing, though. This is the thing. When you are situated and saturated as a privileged person, you don't have to do the work to learn, to think, to grow, to develop because your path has been so delineated and like so cleared for you that all you have to do is just walk. And so it's the like idea of like me walking down this path in imagine like a cornfield, and so like you have this clear path in this cornfield, and so you're going, and you kind of see like people experiencing obstacles. Like you see somebody else kind of like shucking and jiving and like actually trying to cut down the trees and try to figure out. And you're looking like, well, why are they experiencing this? The path is here. The path is ready to go. I don't have to think about it. And so when you don't have to think about the path, when you don't have to do the work, when you don't have to like really dig deep, then you don't find yourself like you're saturated in the ignorance. And I hear you. I definitely hear the fact that they are scared. And it's just like, so are we. But because of the way that we were raised and taught in the world, the way the world has treated us, we had to use our fear as fuel for learning and understanding and navigating and adapting. And when you don't have to do that, when you're not given those tools, you use those fear as harm and as a tool of hate. And so like having like really, really strong conversations. And again, we're looking for former oppressors to be the ones to have those conversations, to put their bodies on the line, both physically and mentally, to do this work because Black women have been put, especially Black women, have put their bodies on the line for a very, very long time, and we're tired and we're done.
So I want to sort of talk about how to apply this concept. I love this word, whiteness management strategies. I'm like, that is something that should be on a shelf somewhere, in the aisle in the grocery store. Whiteness management strategies. You can pick it up and apply it. And so I'm thinking about, especially in terms of pre-service, right? Because the program that I was in, I was educating pre-service administrators, and
Mm-hmm.
that professor of color tax that not only do you have your own students, but you have students from all over the college coming because you're one of the few professors of color, and they look to you for guidance, right? Not only in the classes, but that unpaid labor that we put in because we see these as all of our kids, and they come to us looking for mentorship. And so I'm thinking about, how do you apply the concept of educational facials in the pre-service realm, when we are sort of preparing educators to go in, because we've been there, we're in it, so how do we get folks to understand that this is a concept that you're going to have to take with you, that you can't just go in starry-eyed like things going to be all right. It's not going to be all right, and you need to be prepared and have this in your toolbox. How do we go about doing
I can start because I work with pre-service teachers. Michelle works with pre-service educators as well. I mean, so the whiteness management strategies that really came from kind of contrasting my experiences at Harvard versus at my first faculty appointment, where I had whiteness management strategies. It's like we took friends of color and we would take classes together. We would tag team. We would find white co-conspirators to say, listen, we need you to raise your hand to respond. We can't always be the ones to respond. Or you need to have a side conversation with so and so because they made this problematic comment in class, right? And I would say in the pre-service space, some of the things that I've done in terms of whiteness management. Am I answering the question? I'm going to talk about
that?
whiteness management.
You
Okay,
are.
so one of the things that I have done in the past is once I am able to get some students who are on my side, right? When I was at the University of Pittsburgh, my classes were all white, like no students of color. There was one class, I had 5 Black women. And then I had a few other classes with students of color. I had maybe 10 students of color total in 5 years. So it was all white students. So I would work very hard to get them to understand race, racism, white supremacy. Oftentimes I had to start through gender injustice for some of the women candidates to understand, right? And then what I would do was once they were kind of on my side or understanding the importance of race and racism, I would invite them back. So I would invite former students to come speak to my current class so that they could tell my current students, yes, it's important to learn about race, racism, inequality, justice, social justice, math. Um, I also would invite white colleagues sometimes to Zoom into class and do, like a Q&A with them. Dr. Rick Ayers, who I co-taught with at USF ages ago when I was still a grad student, he has Zoomed into a class. Um, And then I've also, the other thing that I have done, and this is, I think, not healthy necessarily, because I'm basically like using a tool of white supremacy, but I do tell them my own credentials, right? I tell them about my own experiences, teaching experience, because most academics have not had 11 years in the K-12 classroom. And then I also tell them where I went to undergrad, master's, and my doctoral program. I also have my principal certification too in New York State, although maybe it's expired now. So those are the things that I have done in teacher ed. It's a lot different when you have students of color in your teacher ed program. So at UNLV, it's much more diverse. And so we have that common experience. Folks will talk about their community cultural wealth that they bring to the space. And it's just, it's like you can finally exhale and breathe and feel like you're in community. But that would be some of my things that I have done in the past in terms of whiteness management strategies, and working with predominantly white pre-service candidates.
As someone who's kind of just like I'm 10 years, uh, just 10 years from finishing my master's work in education, and I just want to go back, like some of the things that affirming what Carrie's saying, like totally taking classes with other folks who are like minded in this space. But what I really want to stress to pre-service teachers is getting involved, and we talk about this in our podcast, in our podcast, and in our paper. Finding uh, teacher trainings that are ran by teachers, reading these articles and reading these papers. I actually wrote my students a letter when I was in grad school, and for the longest time, I would reread that letter at the beginning of the year. Um, I also think about like small things, like I told this to new teachers who are struggling to get a gratitude jar around like good things that happen in the day, and like always write them down, because as a society we're always negatively prone. And so by writing down those like brief things that happen, you'll see the jar start to accumulate. And so, like, if you find yourself feeling overwhelmed, if you find yourself as a pre-service teacher um, not knowing what to do, like just journaling these things of importance. If you believe in like meditating, finding yourself like understanding different cultures that are outside your space. If you know, if especially if you're like a white woman or anybody, if you know that you're going into a school that's going to be different from you, actually doing some research prior, like this is the community, this is the space that I want to be a part of. Like, how do I like learn about that community, learn about the space? So you write these things and you write these lessons, you make these connections, you find books. Like, how do you diversify your library so that it's reflective of not just the same narrative? What's that black girl, the black girl who started that library, because she said every time she went to the library, all the books were about little white boys and their dogs. Like, how do you diversify like that
Yeah.
kind of space? And as a teacher, when you don't have the time, when you don't have the like wherewithal, you have that stuff to kind of fall back to.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So the last question I have, and this is something, so I use these podcasts also as teaching tools, right? So I assign these to some of our clients, and and a big part of who will be listening to this podcast are HR directors who are put in sort of in front of sometimes their DEI goals of diversifying their teaching force, right? Because some of our clients are folks who have brought in folks of color. They last 2 years, they leave, right? This constant revolving door, and they're left dumbfounded that the environment is not sustainable to keep these educators of color. It's obvious to me, especially when I talk to the educators of color, they're like, "Oh no, that was an oppressive space." I see my colleagues. I am the representative for all brown kids in the building, and they don't understand when I try to explain to them about why this black mom is not trusting them with their child, and I have to be the emissary between them two. All this extra labor, that these people of color have to do, that it's sort of expected actually coming in, right? It's unwritten. So when we say we want to diversify, it's this unwritten list of responsibilities that we're expecting of this brown person, but we're not going to put it in the job description, nor are we going to compensate for it, right? And so for those who are listening to this podcast, and for for you all who understand sort of the context of educators of color, especially in predominantly white spaces, what is your advice to them about broadening their understanding of not just diversifying just for brown skin, but what is the homework that needs to be done to make the space suitable to receive an educator of color?
I'm gonna go first. So when I first became a teacher at SWSD, I'm putting her name. This woman named Amy Chacon was in the HR department, and I don't know how Amy found me, but she had asked me to come up down to HR to talk about how they could go about getting more folks from HBCUs to come to SWSD. So we had this whole conversation about it, and we were talking about it, and Amy was like, "Okay, what do you think about this? What do you think about this?" And so I'm up here like, let me tell you, girl, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm thinking. And then like a couple weeks later, she was like, "Hey, I have this panel that I would like you to sit on um, with like some educators, especially." I was like, "But I'm not. I'm still in grad school." She's like, "No, no, no. Great, great. This is what we're looking for." So I sat on this panel, and I talked during this panel, and shout out to USF because actually my whole like the management of USF came through. It was so cute to see like the dean and like all these professors like coming and supporting like me talking on this panel. And after the panel, she went around and she introduced me to some principals, and I was like, all right. And then like a week or two later, she's like, listen, I want you to become a teacher next year. And I was like, she's like, but I'm gonna help you through this. And so she was just like, I think that you'll be like important to our space. And so I filled out the application, and after I did all the application stuff, she was like, all right, I've already sent your application out to a couple of principals. And she said, here's some of the questions. Let's talk through some of the questions. What are you going to say? So she was like, she put in the work to help to make sure that like I was feeling good. And so like after the interviews, she would call me. She's like, how did the interview go? What do you think? How do you feel about the space? I felt so supported. And then she visited me twice, right? During the school year. And I know that's a lot, but it was like she was invested. And she has since left SWSD. But your girl's still there. 11 years later, I'm still there. And it is 100% because of the investment that Amy put in to me and making me feel good about being in the space.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very, very specific examples about how to create a space that's suitable. Thank you. Carrie, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to draw on what I learned from Luis Delgado, who was the principal at Vanguard High School during the time that I was there, 2001 to 2011. He has since passed, so rest in power to Luis. Knew that was going to happen. He was such an influential person in so many of our lives. He was our school principal. He was, you know, a father figure to many of our kids. And Lewis cared about each of us as people. He was Puerto Rican American. He was from New York City. The thing that Lewis did the best was he left us alone and let us do our jobs. Right? He had a teacher leadership team. So we got to make decisions. We got to make decisions about who we wanted to hire, who we wanted to work with, what curriculum we wanted to use. The math team, we wanted to change the school schedule so that we had more common planning time. So Lewis supported us to do that so that we had more planning time for the math team. And so he used to call it he used to call it trickle down leadership. And I don't think he really was trying to invoke like Reaganomics. But what he really meant was that, when you give teachers leadership, teachers will then do the same with their students, right? So in the classroom, we're doing the same thing. We're having our students lead. Our students are the ones who are the leaders in the classroom. We're not the ones with this like top down approach, right? So he really believed in this grassroots approach to school leadership. And I have been continuously inspired by him and all the work that he has done. Um, and I would say in a higher ed space, the same thing. You need to leave people alone. And sometimes I think what school leaders don't understand is that sometimes we have colleagues who will go out of their way to mess with us and make our lives miserable. Like, go out of their way, spend time going out of their way just to mess with us. Like, don't you have things to do? Don't you have articles to write, research to do, lessons to plan, papers to grade? I don't know. But I think sometimes, if school leaders can stop that from happening, I think that can help with folks of color to stay in an institution. And I also think that there can be some monetary support as well. So one thing actually that I was able to receive was I received a stipend to support to give to a senior scholar to help with my scholarship. So I was able to meet with a senior scholar at a different institution, and my institution compensated for them for their time and labor to meet with me. So I think that was really helpful. I think in a K-12 space, folks can get funded to go to conferences, to go to PD. The Creating Balance in an Unjust World conference on math and social justice, one of the things that we noticed was that we had very many independent schools, math teachers present because they had the funding to go, they had the institutional support, they had the subs to cover their classes, right? And that's how I got interested in what does social justice math look like in these spaces, because we need privileged folks also to be doing the work in solidarity to support folks of color and other marginalized folks doing the work. And I think that support for teachers, or for any type of PD they want to do, I think is helpful. Because one thing I think I really did want to mention that I didn't mention earlier is that when we're talking about social justice math, we also are using research-based pedagogical practices. So we're using cognitively demanding tasks. We are using complex instruction. We're using assessing and advancing questions if we want to talk about the 5 practices. So all of those research-based things we're still doing when we're using social justice mathematics.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for spending time. This has been a truly enlightening conversation for me, a therapeutic conversation, and I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. This has been another episode of the Anti-Racism Leadership Institute Research and Practice podcast. I'd like to thank Michelle Cody and Dr.Kari Kokka for joining me today. If you'd like to know more about them and the work and what they do, please follow their podcast, Critical Math Drop. Available at criticalmathdrop.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. The link to their podcast will be available in the show notes. And watch, follow, like, and thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Anti-Racism Leadership Institute podcast. Remember, the fight against racism starts with each and every one of us. Together, we can create inclusive environments in our schools that celebrate diversity and empower all students. For more information, visit our website at antiracisminstitute.com and subscribe to our channel. Join us next time as we continue to shine a light on the champions of change. Stay inspired, committed, and let's make a difference together.